This is a long one. This is 3 Maccabees chapter 5. Pretty sure it's a very exciting story. The king, completely inflexible, was filled with overpowering anger and wrath. So he summoned Herman, keeper of the elephants, and ordered him on the following day to drug all the elephants, 500 number, with a large handful of frankincense and unmixed wine, and to drive them in, maddened by the lavish abundance of liquor, so that the Jews might meet their doom. When he had given the orders, he returned to his feasting, together with those of his friends and of the army who were especially hostile towards the Jews. Herman, keeper of the elephants, proceeded faithfully to carry out the orders. The servants in charge of the Jews went out in the evening and bound the hands of the wretched people and arranged for their continued custody throughout the night, convinced that the whole nation would experience its final destruction. For to the Gentiles it appeared that the Jews were left without any aid, because in their bonds they were forcibly confined on every side. But with tears and a voice hard to silence, they all called upon the Almighty Lord and ruler of all power, their merciful God and Father, praying that he avert with vengeance the evil plot against them, and in a glorious manifestation rescue them from the fate now prepared for them. So their entreaty ascended fervently to heaven. Herman, however, when he had drugged with the pitiless elephants until they had been filled with a great abundance of wine and satiated with frankincense, presented himself at the courtyard early in the morning to report to the king about these preparations. But the Lord sent upon the king a portion of sleep, that beneficence from which from the beginning, night and day, is bestowed upon him who grants it to whomever he wishes. And by the actions of the Lord he was overcome by so pleasant a deep sleep that he quite failed in his lawless purpose and was completely frustrated in his inflexible plan. Then the Jews, since they had escaped the appointed hour, praised their holy God, and again begged him, who was easily reconciled, to show the might of his all-powerful hand to arrogant Gentiles. But now, since it was nearly the middle of the 10th hour, the person who was in charge of the invitation, seeing that the guests were assembled, approached the king and nudged him, and when he had difficulty roused him. He pointed out that the hour of the banquet was already slipping by. He gave him an account of the situation. The king, after considering this, returned to his drinking and ordered those present for the banquet to recline opposite him. When this was done, he urged them to give themselves over to revelry and to make the present portion of the banquet joyful by celebrating all the more. After the party had been going on for some time, the king summoned Herman, and with the sharp threats demanded to know why the Jews had been allowed to remain alive throughout the present day. But when he, with the corroboration of his friends, pointed out that while it was still night, he carried out completely the order given him, the king, possessed by a savagery worse than that of Phalaris, said that the Jews were benefited by today's sleep. But he added, tomorrow, without delay, prepare the elephants in the same way for the destruction of the lawless Jews. When the king had spoken, all those present readily and joyfully with one accord gave their approval, and each departed in his own home. But they did not so much employ the duration of the night in sleep as in devising all sorts of insults for those they thought to be doomed. Then, as soon as the cock had crowed in the early morning, Herman, having equipped the beasts, began to move them along in the great colony made. The crowds of the city had been assembled for this most pitiful spectacle, and they were eagerly awaiting for daybreak. But the Jews, at their last but gasped, since the time had run out, stretched their hands towards heaven, and with most tearful supplication and mournful dirges implored the supreme God to help them at once. The rays of the sun were not yet shed abroad, and while the king was receiving his friends, Herman arrived and invited him to come out, indicating that what the king desired was ready for action. But he, upon receiving the port and being struck by the unusual invitation to come out, since he had been completely overcome by incomprehension, inquired what the matter was for which this had been so zealously completed for him. This was the act of God who rules over all things, for he had implanted in the king's mind a forgetfulness of the things and had previously devised. Then Herman and all the king's friends pointed out that the beasts of the armed forces were ready, O king, according to your eager purpose. But at these words he was filled with an overpowering wrath because of the providence of God. His whole mind had been deranged in regard to these matters. With a threatening look he said, "Were your parents or children present, I would have prepared them to be a rich feast for the savage beasts instead of the Jews, who give me no ground for complaint, and exhibited to an extraordinary degree of full and firm loyalty to my ancestors. In fact, you would have been deprived of life instead of these, were it not for an affection arising from our nurture in common and your usefulness." So Herman suffered an unexpected dangerous threat, and his eyes wavered and his face fell, and the king's friends, one by one, solemnly slipped away and dismissed the assembled people, each to his own occupation. Then the Jews, upon hearing what the king had said, praised and manifested the Lord God, the King of Israel. Lord God, King of Kings, since also this was his aid which they had received. The king, however, reconvened the party in the same manner and urged the guests to return to their celebrating. After summoning Herman, he said in a threatening tone, "How many times, you poor wretch, must I give you orders about these things? Equip the elephants now once more for the destruction of the Jews tomorrow." But the officials who were at the table with him were wondering at his instability of his mind, remonstrated as follows: "O king, how long will you try us as though we are idiots, ordering now for a third time that they be destroyed, and again revoking your decree in the matter? As a result, the city is in turmoil because of its expectation. It is crowded with masses of people in constant danger of being plundered." Upon this, the king, Phalaris in everything and filled with madness, took no account of the change of mind which had come about within him for the protection of the Jews, and he firmly swore an irrevocable oath that he would send them to death without delay, mangled by the knees and feet of the beasts, and would also march against Judea and rapidly level it to the ground with fire and spear, and by burning to the ground the temple inaccessible to him, would quickly render it forever empty of those who offered sacrifices there. Then the friends and officers departed with great joy, and they confidently posted the armed forces at the places in the city most favorable for keeping guard. Now, when the beasts had been brought virtually to the state of madness, so to speak, by the very fragrant draughts of the wine mixed with frankincense, and had been equipped with frightful devices, the elephant keeper entered about dawn into the courtyard, the city now being filled with countless masses of people, crowding their way into the hippodrome, urged the king onto the matter at hand. So he, when he had filled his impious mind with a deep rage, rushed out in full force along with the beasts, wishing to witness the invulnerable heart with his own eyes, grievous and pitiful destruction of the aforementioned people. And when the Jews saw the dust raised by the elephants going out at the gate, and by following armed forces, as well as the trampling of the crowd, and heard the loud tumultuous noise, they thought that this was the last moment of life, the end of their most miserable suspense, and giving way to lamentation and groans, they kissed each other, embracing relatives and falling into one another's arms, parents and children, mothers and daughters, others with babies at their breasts who were drawing their last milk. Not only this, but when they considered the help which they had received before from heaven, they prostrated themselves with only one accord on the ground, removing the babies from their breasts, and cried out in a very loud voice, imploring the ruler over every power to manifest himself and to be merciful to them. And they stood now at the gates of death.